Well, hello and welcome to the third CSS video where we focus on font and text properties, and we'll be seeing quite a few of those properties as we move through a particular document and format it. And let's get right to that document so we can see what our starting point and our hopeful ending point is. This is the starting point. It's a page that's a personal website page where someone has got a number of links. These links don't actually go anyplace, so you can click them and you won't get anywhere. But they represent, a typical personal website with a number of various pages involved in the site. And this is kind of a web blog page where the person types up, some comments that they're having on a certain day and collect them. And the page involves a lot of type, so we're going to have a lot of opportunity to try to, our challenge here is to make this page that is based entirely on type. There are no graphics involved in the page whatsoever, and our goal is to try to make a visually interesting and well-organized page. It does use a table. As you can see, I've left the border on as a starting point so we can see the table, and it's got a row across the top and then a second row with two columns, the left for the navigation, the right for the actual weblog entries, and then at the bottom a footer that goes across and spans those two columns. So three-row table basically. Later on we will learn how to create such a page without even using a table, but at this point we're going to go ahead and make use of a typical table. Now, where are we going with this? When we get done with all of our CSS formatting, this is what our page will hopefully look like, and I want to point out a few things about what's been done. First of all, we do have a color scheme involving the greens and the browns, as you can see, and it's fairly consistently applied. We have the table border is no longer there. Instead, we have a CSS border that cuts between the two columns. We have links that are all this sort of light green color. We have links also here. They behave a little bit differently. They're the same color, but you can see that they have no underlining until you mouse over. These have underlining, and when you mouse over they have underlining and overlining. We can see different fonts in usage here. Down in the copyright area you can see how it is all bunched together and de-emphasized, whereas this area is a little bit more spread out in terms of the lettering, and we have lots of text and font properties in usage here. And we can also see consistent application of this style here, here, and here on each of the right ends of the headings there. Consistent color and fonts applied to these headings. Consistent across these two with colors and font approaches. So we can see that there's consistency in the page in terms of its design, which helps. Yet there's also contrast. We have obviously a very light colored table background here to set off our text, and we also have some alignment importance here in terms of the links. There's a portfolio section supposedly in the site, and there's a photography, writings, web design, and 3D artwork all within portfolio, and that's why we have the indenting there. And we see the same thing. The daily spin is the section of the website involving weblogs, and then there's the most recent ones, and then ones from a week ago, a month ago, etc. We don't, again, see any of this rest of the website, but we're assuming that they're there, and so these bold areas here are indicating that this is the current page that we're on, the daily spin most recent, and that's what we see here, daily spin most recent, and we see weblogs from today, yesterday, and so on. So that's kind of the overall perspective on the site, as well as where we're going with the formatting. Okay, so let's now go from beginning point and take a look at what files you have as a starting point. You've got these two files. There's an HTML document and a CSS document. We're going to use the HTML validator software to work with both of those files simultaneously. So I've already got the validator open. You can go ahead and do the same if you want to follow along. I'm using version 6.52 of the HTML validator. If you've got an older version, you might want to update that. If not, it doesn't really matter. It's not that much different anyway. So you should be able to follow along either way. I'm going to open these two files now. And then we'll get started on the formatting and take a look at a little bit of the code as well. Wherever you might have yours, go to that area and bring up the folder. Should be the same name as mine, CSS Video 3 font text. And here are the two files. I'm going to control click the second one and bring them both in simultaneously. And they come in, as you can see, both the HTML document and the corresponding CSS. There isn't much CSS yet, just enough to get a little bit of a background on the page. And the HTML is not entirely complete either. We'll have to add some divs and spans here and there as we need them. But let's get started. Again, we're going to begin with some general styles that don't have anything to do with font and text properties, and then we'll come back and really focus on those font and text properties. But I have a little bit of work still, particularly if we look at our final destination again. We need to get some more of the color involved around the borders and backgrounds of these areas. And currently, as you can see, our site just has the background on the page. So we need to do some more work there, and that's where we're going to start working. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is add a div around the table itself. Okay, to get some extra background area, almost like a frame around the table, normally what you'd do if you were just doing this completely in HTML is you'd nest one table inside the other and give each of them different backgrounds, and you can achieve a similar effect. In our case, we're going to nest one div around the table, so we still need just one table, and we're going to have a div with an ID equal to page. That's just a name I chose to use. If your validator is an older one, it's probably not doing this, closing your tags for you. This one is. There's an option that you can tell it not to do that if you want to, and it may actually be easier to have it not do that because we're adding into a document that's already there. But at any rate, whether or not, just be aware of that. And this is beginning right underneath the body tag on what I have as line 11. I'm going to go down and end this just above the closing body tag, which will actually throw it up here at the end of the table. And that gives us the ability then to add some more formatting onto the div, which will be inside the body and outside the table. Okay, let's go to the CSS, and right between body and table there, I'm going to add the selector for that, and that's going to be div pound page because I did an ID, no spaces in there. You could just do pound page, but I like to give the qualifier so I know what it is I'm really selecting, and you'll see that throughout this style. So what we're going to do here is give it a background, and I'm not going to explain everything we do with this because this is not font and text properties, so I'm just going to whip this out here to get us going. The color I'm going to give for the background is CC 99, and we're going to give padding of 10 pixels. That's going to basically give you 10 pixels with that background on it. And I'm also going to add a border, which is a solid. The color will be 663300, and it will be 3 pixels thick. Alright, and that concludes the properties that I'm going to give to that area. Let's see the result of that. I save, I go to, you can click the button to preview in browser. I already have it here, so I'll just go right to it. And when we refresh, what I've done is I've added the div around here, And the padding really gives the space for that. Gee, that didn't work too well, did it? Let's come back and see if I did something wrong or what. Oh, I didn't save my HTML document. This is the button to press, save all, when you're working with multiple documents, so you can save everything and come back. Sorry about that. Okay, now when we refresh, bingo. We have the border, the 3-pixel border, and this is the 10-pixel padding, and the background then is able to come in at that area. The div itself doesn't really create any space, so you've got to use the padding to indicate how much space you want between the edge of the div and the edge of the table. Alright, with that done, and you can't really see the, well, we actually have a border on the table coming up too. And that is going to be giving us a little line to finish this off. It's solid 1 pixel, and it is 999900. And that's just going to give us a little line in the table area. Let's take a look and see. Should be just in this area. May not be that easy to see even. You can kind of see it's a little darker green line right in there. We've also got the table border kind of interfering with that, so it's hard to see. I'm going to leave the table border on for a while so we can keep our eyes on what's happening with these elements as we play with them. Eventually we'll take it off. Alright, to continue now, let's get into some actual font and text properties. We're going to work initially with the top section, which has the H1 and H2. We can take a look at how things are laid out here. We're going to be working in that top TD, which spans both columns and contains the H1 and the H2. Now the H1 is a little strange because it involves 2 lines. Joe Students is on one line, there's a break, and then Daily Spin is below it. And then the H2 contains the most recent text. Okay, and that's what we're going to really play with. You can see in comparing what we have now, it's this area right here, and what we were hoping to achieve with that area is this. So we want the top line to be small and to actually use small caps. It's a slightly bigger S and J than the other letters. This is small caps in here. A very enlarged second line, bigger than an H1 would normally be. And then an H2 over here, which is right aligned, it's italicized, and it's made to be lowercase, even though the text in the HTML isn't all lowercase. We'll transform that text to be lowercase. And that's the major goals of that area. So let's go ahead and begin work on that. The first thing we'll do is set some font properties for the H1 itself. So the H1 is going to have a font size of 300%. You can either give 300% or you could say 3EM. Either way, I'm just going to stick with percentages for my font sizes in this. You definitely don't want to use points since we're working with screen and not print media here. And the font family I'm going to set here for my H1, and that font family is going to be Georgia. If Georgia isn't there, we'll go with Times New Roman. Since it's more than one word, I'm using quotes. And Times. Normally Times New Roman is not available on Macs, and so it would go to Times instead. Similar looking. Different name. And then serif would be the generic font family for that. Alright, and let's close that off. We're not done, but for now let's take a look at what that does when we view in the browser and refresh. We'll see this area got really big. Well, we wanted the Daily Spin to be big. The Joe Student we didn't, and we'll have to make changes in that somehow. Alright, the other changes that I want to make and I'm just going to use a new H1 to continue. The other changes I want to make are to word spacing and letter spacing and the color. I want to spread it out a little bit more. This is a big heading. I want to spread out the words, so I'm going to alter the normal word spacing and make it 4 pixels more than usual between words, and letter spacing is going to be 2 pixels more than it usually is. This is adding to the already existing pixel spacing, and color is going to be changed to something that will go better with our green. So it'll be 996600. Okay. And we'll save and preview. Okay, you see how that spread things out a little bit there. And the color is obviously different. Alright, now Joe Student was not supposed to be so big. So let's work with that next. Now again, if you look at the HTML in that area, you can see that they're on 2 lines. But if we're going to format Joe Students different from the other, we're going to need to put some kind of span in there. So let's do that. We go to the HTML now on line 15, and we're just going to put a span in there. And I'll take the closing span and I'll drag and drop it right after the S. Okay, or you can type it in there if you're not getting the closing tag generated for you. And now back in the CSS, we now have a way of selecting that by using H1 space span. We could also give the span an ID, but it's going to be the only span inside our only H1, so I'm not going to bother with the overkill there. Now, what we do with that H1 span is we're going to set the font size much smaller, 30%. Now, since this is inside an H1 already, not the H1 itself, but inside the H1, this is really 30% of the 300% that the H1 was set to. So we're really getting back to about 90% of what a normal P tag would be in terms of size. So we're pretty safe. It's pretty small, but still will be quite readable. Alright, continuing with that, we're going to use font, especially readable, because we're going to use font variant property and get us small caps. Alright, that's going to make that area, even though it's smaller, pretty readable. Alright, and that will conclude our formatting of the span. I want to save both files because I did change. I want to make that same mistake again. And we'll come back in and really look at what happens to this line. Alright, quite a change there. Alright, continuing now. We have what, it's a little strange, but it almost looks like that J starts in front of the D. It's probably just the letter form of the D itself having a little space there, but it almost looks like that J is out ahead of the D. Now we need an excuse to use the text indent property anyway, so I'm going to just scoot that J over just a few pixels using the text indent property. Now the text indent only indents the first line of the block or paragraph. In this case it's an H1, so using text indent on the entire H1 would only move this over, which is what I want to do. This is really just a little tweak, but we can add this actually to the second H1. We've got room to do that. It's going to be text indent, and we're just going to go about 5 pixels. Save. And when we preview that, we're not looking for much, but we expect this one line to scoot over just a tad. Alright, you can see it does. Now it lines up a little bit better. Looks like it's really aligned properly. Just kind of a quirk in the way those letter forms work. Okay. So we're pretty much set there. And now we're going to turn our attention to the H2. The H2 is this guy, most recent. That's the one that needs to get over there onto the right and be italicized, and actually uses a different font entirely. So let's move into that area. On line 10 here, I'm going to work on the H2. So for the H2, we're going to do text align to the right. By the way, I should mention, all we're looking here is the HTML tag inserters. If you want to, if you're getting tired of trying to type these properties, font size, word spacing, etc., you can always use the View menu and activate the CSS Inserters if they're not already present. And when you do that, if you're trying to type text align, for example, you just bring down and go for that. It doesn't help you with the property values such as right or small caps, but it does help you with the actual property names. So we're doing text align to the right, and we're going to be doing to that H2 font size 135%, which is actually smaller than, I believe, what an H2 would normally be. It's 135% of what a P would be. So I think that's a little smaller than what you typically see in H2, which is what we want. And then the color is olive, which is a shade of green that's a little bit lighter than our page background, I believe. And that'll conclude our H2 settings. Save and refresh. And we're expecting this to scoot over and look there. Now I also wanted to change the font family actually, so I don't think we're quite concluding everything. Notice the similarity in this look to the look of today and yesterday and 3 days ago in terms of those brackets and it being on the rightmost end of those headings. We're going to try to make them all look the same. So we're going to kind of tie together that special formatting as just part of the style of the page. And so we're going to do, first of all, let's take a look at the HTML in those heading areas, and we'll see it in these places. There's already a span set up for you around the word today, yesterday, and 3 days ago, and it's a span with a class of date. Of course it's a class because we have multiple occurrence of it, and date is the actual class name used on those. You can see them there. So if we want to format them all the same in our CSS, we would use this selector H2, comma, and then we could use I guess they're inside H4, so we could do H4.date. You could just do .date, but again, doing H4, actually what would it be? H4 dot, no, it's a span inside, so there's a number of things I guess we could do. H4 span.date would be the full way of doing it. I think that's a little overkill, so we could just do H4.date. And then the settings we want to give to that are font family. We're setting up a different font for usage on that. It's going to be a monospace font. Courier new, comma, Courier, in case Courier new isn't available, and then monospace, if not neither of those are available. Alright, and then in addition to that, we're going to do a few other things, such as text transform. I don't know if we're going to have a space to do all of this here, but the text transform is to make it all lowercase. We'll go to the next line and continue this. tab into that line and continue more. In addition to the text transform lowercase, we're going to go font style of italic. And we're also going to do a margin left. It really won't affect the H2, but it will affect the H4. The margin left on that is 15 pixels. We'll see what that all does in a moment. Let's save our CSS and preview our new looking areas. Again, we're looking in here and in here. The margin left won't affect this because it's already to the right, but the margin left will give us space between these and these and these, just setting it off a little bit more, making it more visible. Okay, you can see how it's jumped over and jumped over, and see how the italicized and the font change and all is pretty noticeable now. The color of these will all end up changing too, so that they'll end up being different than what they look like now, the H4s at least, but I think we're done now with the H2 in terms of its fonts. Alright, let's move on. We now have an issue I want to address in the margins. Notice how much space there is here. To me, this is too much space between these, between those, and between these. I'd like to move some stuff up. We'll talk more about this in a later video and later work in our class, but for now, we're going to just do the following. H1s and H2s are going to be given margin top of 0 and margin bottom of 0, and that will decrease that area. Sorry, in addition, we're going to have the line height, GHT, the line height in those areas decrease to 0.9. That's considerably less than the typical line height would be. So we're trying to scrunch things together in that area a little bit. Let's see what that does. We come back. Again, this is not really, the margins don't have anything to do with font and text properties. The line height does. We come back, and we're hoping to see this area scrunch up and take up less vertical space. When we refresh, we can see that these guys are much closer together, that this has come up, and it's brought all this up with it. So that's really, I think, giving us more of the important text on the page to be visible, which is a good thing in our case. So we're now going to move down and work on the H3 headings. The H3 headings, and go back to our original page, we can see these are the H3 headings at the top, and these are H4s here. So moving along, the H3 headings, we're going to give font size of 110%, so it's not much bigger than a normal paragraph would be, slightly bigger. The color of those is that same olive color that we gave earlier for the H2, so same color as the H2s. And we also are going to give a margin bottom of 1.5 EM. EM is a unit that's based on the current font size. So it's like 1.5 times the vertical height of the text in that area. That's really how you would read that. Alright, let's see what that does. Come back to our page and we look at those H3s. Now that's this area. And I believe that margin bottom is going to give us a little bit more space in there. Yep, drops it down a little bit so we get a little bit more spacing to make the headings a little bit more prominent. They're not particularly large, so we want a little bit of space to differentiate them. Okay, and we're using the same font think for those are H3s. The font that's being picked up for those is just a normal serif font. Alright, let's move on. Go back to our style sheet. And our next step is to work with the H4s. The H4s are in the weblog area on the right hand side of the page. The H4s are going to have font size of 80%. Now that may sound small, it is. It's less than a normal P tag would be. So to compensate for that, we're going to transform the text to uppercase so that it's much more readable. The color we're going to use is a brown color, 996600. It's the same as the H1 color, you might recall. All right, in addition to that, as I mentioned, we'll transform the text to uppercase. When we mean transform, it means that if the H4s in the HTML are lowercase or mixed, it'll transform them on the page to be all uppercase, regardless of what it might look like in the H4. If you actually look at the H4, you'll see that they're a mix of upper and lowercase. So we're going to transform it to all uppercase, making it much more readable even at 80%. Alright, and let's finish that off with the bracket and save and view the H4s in the browser. Now we're looking at this and so forth. And you can see they're now brown, matching this color. And there's the other one. We have 3 different H4s in this particular document. Okay, we still need quite a bit of work in the links area and some more work elsewhere, including the work down in the footer area of the page. So there's quite a bit still to go, but it's taking shape. The last area here I want to set are P tags before we move into other areas. Now there's P tags all over this page, and let me point them out before we go into any further work. All the links are actually in their own P tags. That was done by design because I wanted fairly large spacing between them, so I didn't use BRs or divs, which would have reduced that quite a bit. And these are also P tags, the main weblog text. In each case is one paragraph, and then there's a final paragraph here with a BR separating the 2 lines for the copyright area or footer area. So we expect anything we set to P to affect the left, right, and bottom areas. And in fact, what we're going to do with that is set a font family trying to make the text more readable than it currently is, and by using a serif font, and one that's pretty good in terms of being readable on screen. That's Trebuchet MS. We'll use Verdana as a secondary. Those are 2 of the most readable sans serif fonts in existence for screen usage, Trebuchet MS and Verdana, and they're both highly installed across the user base, so you can expect pretty good results with that. Ariel is another one that maybe not quite as readable, but very, very common, so you're not likely to end up coming out here and needing this generic font family of sans serif, but if so, it's there. The font size for those, because we have such a readable font, we can afford to drop the font size down to 90% to get more of it on the page. And to make it more readable, we're going to do a couple of other things. Since we are dropping the font size a little, I want to do a few things to make it more readable than it already is. I'll hit enter and tab and continue. The other things we're going to do with it are to increase the line height to 1.5. So that's basically 1.5 spacing. Line height, by the way, is best done without any units. It's a strange thing, But line height, as we saw here and now here, again, no units at all. It's like 1.5 spacing, double spacing, whatever. And the other thing that doesn't take units is anytime you use a 0 value. For example, in the top margins, we didn't need to say 0 pixels or 0 EM or 0 anything. 0 is 0. No confusion there from the browser. And the last thing we want to change for those paragraphs to make them more readable is to increase the letter spacing by 1 pixel between. So between each letter, an additional pixel. So we're really compensating for the 90% by opening up, choosing a very readable font, opening up vertically and opening up also horizontally. And let's see what we get. We'll go back to our, take a look at these paragraphs. Right now this is a serif font, and the letters themselves are pretty well jammed together. I think you'll agree, even going with a 90% size, that this is much more readable and much more pleasant to the eye to see when you're dealing with large amounts of text, as we are here. This is pretty readable, not much of a strain on the eye. You've got that spacing between the letters and the spacing vertically that makes it a lot easier to follow along reading, on a screen basis. Now, the only thing that I want to call your attention to that I don't like still about this page is that the headings are right between the paragraphs. I think a heading should be closer to the paragraph that it's associated with than the previous one. In other words, I would like to see more space above the heading than there is below. It's a little harder the way we have things set up to decrease the spacing below, but that might be what we do normally. Instead, what I'm going to do is increase the spacing above. Alright, and that's something we're going to do a little bit later, but we'll look for that in the weblog area. We're going to move next, however, down to the footer. I'm going to leave a space here. We'll move down to the footer. The footer of the page, looking at the HTML, there's a div inside that TD at the bottom in the last row of the table with an ID of footer, so keep that in mind, and a simple paragraph, as I mentioned before, with the BR separating the two lines. So we'll keep that in mind when we're putting together our selectors here for the footer. The first footer selector we'll use is pound footer, not fodder, but footer, P. So we're affecting the P tag inside the footer, which is pretty much the only thing in there. We're going to take the opposite approach to what we just did in terms of opening things up. We're going to try to make this footer, which is a copyright area, even less prominent than it normally would be with just a P tag. So we're going to actually use negative letter spacing and word spacing. Not something you really want to do very often because of potential bad effects on readability, but we're looking for excuses to use some of these properties in interesting ways. So we're going to go -1 pixel word spacing and letter spacing. It's really going to jam that text together quite a bit. The line height, we're also going to decrease slightly to 1.25. That's not a big decrease. You might think line height was normally 1. It actually isn't for most texts. It's varies maybe around 1.3 or so. So this is a slight bringing together vertically of the two lines that we have. Continuing, a number of others. We're going to hit Enter, Tab, and continue. Font size is going to be 80%. And the color, we're going to make the color less prominent by using something lighter, CC 9966. It's a light brown, which goes well with the existing color scheme. And we're going to align it to the center, so we're using text align. We used text align to the right before. We're going to text align this footer copyright area to the center. And that will conclude that selector. Let's take a look at the differences in what we have. So we closed up the spacing between the letters, between the words, between the lines, decreased the font size to boot, made the color less noticeable, and centered it. So we're really going to be decreasing the prominence of this in many ways. You can see right now it's just as prominent as the other text on the page. When we preview this new version of it, you can see how the letters are much tighter together. Vertically they're a lot closer together. The text is rather light, not very prominent at all, and we've achieved pretty much what we were after there. Now, the one other part of this, we need an excuse to use the vertical align property, and this is how we're going to use it. You see this little TM? That's a trademark, daily spin trademark TM. That is usually superscripted a little bit above the normal line area, and so we're going to try to do that. There are other ways to get the TM to do that without needing what we're going to be doing. But let's find that TM in the HTML. Here it is. What we need to do is span it so that we can select it out separately. So I'm putting a span right around the TM, and I'm going to add an ID to that span. We'll just call it trademark. So we've got an ID of trademark just around the TM, and now we can select that in our CSS. So we're going to do a pound trademark. You know, to be more exact, you could do pound footer space pound trademark, but this will work okay. It's pretty explicit as it is. What we're going to do with that trademark is do vertical align. This was kind of the whole motivation for that, is to get the vertical align property in here. And you can do sub for subscripting, super for superscripting, and there are other alignments as well. And then the font size, we want to make it smaller than usual, so 60% will decrease it quite a bit because it's basically a superscripted item. Some browsers, I think, will decrease the font size themselves. I know IE6 doesn't, so for IE6's purposes, we'll do this and see what it looks like. We better save everything. Save all. We had to add both the span and the new CSS. When we refresh, you see the little TM now raised up above the line and a bit smaller as well. So we got the effect we were after there. So enough of the footer. Let's move on. The other areas that we have to work with next will be the links. So let's go back to our page again and take a look at the links. I don't like the color of these links, and I don't like all the underlining. Notice also that these are not links, Daily Spin and Most Recent, because that's the page we're on. We aren't showing the structure of these guys being in the portfolio and these guys being in the Daily Spin. So we need those indentations that we were talking about before when we first looked at this page in the browser. And the color scheme I don't like on the links. And all this underlining really in this area, it's a sitemap area. These are all the links to the site. It's pretty obvious that that's what this is. It's a typical area where that is done on the left side or across the top, in this case the left side. So I don't think these underlinings are really necessary. These are a little bit more necessary because you might not expect a link at that spot. So we're going to leave the underlining here and we're going to take it off there. Treating links differently in different areas takes some careful selecting. So we'll see that. So we begin with some general link rules that will apply to any link in any part of the page. So link, and I'm going to treat normal links and visited links identically. So I'll save myself the trouble of writing two rules by doing the comma and apply these property settings to both. In this case, it's just changing the color to 999900, which is kind of a light green. And then we'll do the same thing to the hover links that we do to the active links. So we've got :hover and :active, comma separated, and we'll apply a different color to them. That color would be olive, which is slightly darker than the previous green color given, so that when you hover over, the links get a little darker and more prominent. In addition to that, I wanted to handle the underlining issue. First we'll do the color issue, then we'll add to it. Alright, going to the browser, refreshing, we see the color change. I think it's a good idea to have the links look pretty similar elsewhere on the page. So we're going to keep the color the same throughout, but we're going to change what happens in terms of the underlining. So we'll pull the underlining off those. We'll leave it on these so it's a little more obvious that those are links. Alright, to do that we add some rules to :hover and :active there. And that is for text decoration. I'm really focusing on the links on the right side of the page now. We'll come back and write rules for the left side in a second. So the ones on the right side, they already have text decoration of underline on them. So when you hover over, I'm going to go underline, overline, which means both underlining and overlining. This is going to apply to all links currently. Later it will be overridden on the left side links, and this will only affect the right side links, or if we had a link anywhere else on the page for that matter. Alright, now when I mouse over, you see I'm getting the underline and overline as well as the darkened green color on hover. Of course it's happening over here as well, and we're going to have to undo that by selecting those links in particular and setting some new rules that will override those. Let's see, I'm going to go right into that next. And to select those links, we've got to be a little bit more careful in our selection. First of all, I'm using #links here, and I should demonstrate that div. Here it is. There's a div that surrounds that whole sitemap link area, and all the links are there. So if we do #links, we're talking about this area. Alright, let's go back to the CSS. So if I do #links space :link, I'm talking about the initial link state of those on the left side only. And I also want to do that for visited. So that would be #links :visited. So that's quite a selector, and let's look at it more closely. You're basically saying any link in its normal state on the left side, as well as any link on the left side that's visited. And what are they going to get? Well, they're going to get different text decoration. They're going to get text decoration of none. Right? I don't want any text decoration, no underlining, in other words, which would be defaulted if I don't say this, as we saw. So I'm going to do that. And then for those links when they are hovered or active, hover, comma, or active, we'll do the usual text decoration of underline. So we see links everywhere else on the page will be underlined, overlined when you hover, but these links on the left side aren't underlined to begin with at all, so when you hover over you just get underlining. Right, let's see if we're successful in giving specific link styles to the left side. Looks like we were. You can see that these are not underlined, but they do underline and get darker when you mouse over. These guys are still behaving the same way. So that's the effect we were looking for. Now the other part of the links area that I need to work on is the indentation, as I mentioned before, as well as giving some kind of special formatting to those two that aren't really links and represent instead the current page. And of course, if we went to, say, a portfolio page, then on that page we would expect that same kind of non-link for that, which would have the same formatting as what we're about to put here. All right, let's go back to the HTML and CSS to work a little bit further on the link area. What we're going to do next is play around a little bit here with the indentation of things, or the left margins of things. Let's see. We need to go to the HTML, and notice that in the HTML I've kind of indented this area as part of the portfolio and indented this area as part of the daily spin. That's fine, but the browser doesn't see it that way. So in order to make that really be indented, I'm going to have to add some divs around it and style them. So we'll go div and class equal, I'm going to just call this level 2, it's kind of like a level 2 of set of links. And my closing div, I'm going to put down just here at the bottom, and I'm going to move it over. So I've basically said that these are level 2 links, and then I can move them with some either text indent or left margin. Okay, and then I'll do a similar thing here. I'm just going to copy. The reason why I used a class is that there's two of these, one for the portfolio and one for the weblog section, the daily spin. And then the closing div I can also copy and paste down to line 39. And so I now have a level 2 class on both of these areas that I want to have indented. Alright, now we can go back to the CSS and select for those. Alright, so it's pound links space, and then it's the div inside there, so it's pound links dot level 2. Dot because it's a class, and it's a class because there's more than one of them. I could just do dot level 2, but I want to clarify that it's in the links. It's a level 2 links area. Alright, and what I want to do with that, we're going to use, I could use text indent or I could use margin left. To me, it's really more of a margin left thing, but when you have a one-line item, you can do text indent, and it really works out to be pretty much the same thing. So I'll set margin left. We're going to go with 1.5, 1.5 EM. It's going to move it over maybe about 3 letters or so. Better save it all. Let's come back and see that change. Refresh, and we can see how it's moved over about 3 or 4 letters. From the EMs are vertical height distances, not horizontal. So 3 EMs you might think would be 3, and 1.5 would be 1.5, but it's vertical, not horizontal. So when you're using it as a horizontal measurement, you typically get more. At any rate, we got essentially the look. We can see the structure of the site now much better. The next thing I want to do is I want to scoot over. I think everything here is a little bit too close to the left-hand side of the page. The reason we're getting anything on the left side here is because of the cell padding in the table. I didn't want to increase the cell padding too much more because it also increases the height padding areas, and we end up way down on the page further than we want. So I'm going to have to do the rest of it with a left indent. And so that's what we'll look at next. We're going to go below here, and we're going to do a pound links. So we're going to do it to that whole left-hand side, and we're also going to do it to the H1. and it's going to be a margin left. So the entire section is going to move over. And that margin left is just going to be 15 pixels. It might make sense to use EMs for that as well, but it just made more sense in terms of what I wanted to do pixels. So we want to keep the alignment of these guys. So I had to do an H1 as well as this whole links area. Alright, let's refresh and see. And now it all jumps over. We have plenty more rim space there. It looks a little bit nicer. Okay, so we're done with that area, except for handling those special page areas. Okay, so let's do that next. If we look at the HTML, we have daily spin, which is not a link because that's the current page we're on, and most recent, which is the current page we're on. This is the current section we're in, and this is the actual page within that section we're in. So we're going to put a special class on those P's. The class name I'm going to use, since there's two, I use classes. The class name will be this page, and we'll put that also on the most recent. Class equal this page. Okay, now I can select those quite easily just using dot this page or pound links space dot this page, and then we can do whatever we want. And what we want is to make them look a little more prominent, so we're going to bold them. So we'll go pound links space dot this page, and we will do font weight bold, and we'll change the color and make it a little bit darker, and we'll use 999900. And that's a color that we've used before, matching the color scheme of things pretty well. We need to save all, come back to the browser, and look at the area we're focusing on now is right here, these guys. Refresh, and there you see the bold and the slightly darker green, indicating that, hey, these aren't links because you're on that page. Typical thing. Okay. Return now. And we want to do one last thing with these links. Let's notice that the links actually extend. There's quite a bit of space between these links, and they actually extend rather down well below the actual weblog area. Okay, I'm going to decrease the spacing between the links a little bit. We can use that. We can use line height to do that with. And so that's going to be pound links space P, and we're going to change line height to just 1.2. So it should just slightly decrease the line spacing in there. And we'll save that. And I think if we bring our attention to this area, we'll see it move up. It's hard to see how much space a difference there is just eyeballing between them, but you can certainly see how this whole section was brought up at least enough to make these two columns pretty much line up. When we add more spacing in these areas above the H4s, the weblog will actually extend down below the links. Okay. The next thing we want to do is exactly what I just mentioned. Add some spacing in that weblogs area. So we're going to come down here, and we're going to want to write some rules that affect that weblog. Let's go to the HTML. In the weblogs area on the right hand side, you can see all that text in here. I want to put a div around this area so that we can talk about stuff inside of it. So we're going to do the typical technique there of adding a div, in this case the ID will be blogs. And then we'll take the closing div tag and we'll move it to the bottom of that section just above the TD, and we'll indent that appropriately and do the same for this section and indent it appropriately. And so now we have a div. Now we have a div that we can use to select anything in this area that we like. Alright, now back to the CSS, and what we want to do with it is a couple things. First of all, using #blogs, I'll set a margin, a left margin, just to separate the two columns a little bit more. And not by much, just 10 more pixels. I don't want to cram things together too much more, but that'll just give us a little bit more space between the columns. We'll come and take a look at that. Oops, I need to save all again. You'd think I'd learn by now. Alright, we're talking about giving a little more space here between the end of the table and the beginning of the text. When we refresh, you can see we got a little bit more now. That's all that did. And then the other setting we want to do to the blogs area, to the paragraphs in the blogs, the actual blogs themselves, and those I'm going to give a margin bottom to. You don't have to worry too much about all these margin settings on this page. We haven't really covered all about margins and backgrounds and things. We're really trying to focus on the font and text properties, but we keep bumping into them. It's hard to get around the usage of them. I'm going to go for a pretty big margin bottom at 2.75 EM. That's rather large, and we'll see the effect. What I'm trying to do again is to get a little bit more proximity between the H4 headings, these guys, and the paragraph below by increasing the space below. Okay, so I said margin bottom on these paragraphs, so we're increasing space here and here. So when we refresh, you can see a lot more spacing now in here. Spaces out the whole page a little bit more and has the effect of making the headings associate with the weblog paragraphs a little bit more, and by creating more space here than there is there. It also just spaces the page out and makes it a little bit less crowded. And, as I mentioned before, brings this weblog area down below where the links are. Alright, the next thing I'm going to do, and it's about time that we got rid of the table borders so we can really see the page in terms of how it's going to look when we get done. So let's do that. We go to the HTML, we find the table tag up towards the top, line 12, and change the border from 1 to 0. It was just 1 so we could see it, and it wasn't ever intended to be seen in the final result. So back in the browser, when we refresh, we see that all those borders are gone now. But look at this border. You can now see we did actually give the table a border in CSS. A table border in CSS goes around only the outer edge of the table and not inside the rows and columns. So you can see that we get that little line around without any stuff in between. However, remember the final version did have a dotted border between these two columns to kind of help visually separate them, and so we're going to create that next by going to the CSS and creating that. Now that's actually we're going to put a right border on the links. I suppose we could have put a left border on the blogs, but we're going to use a right border on the links. So I'm going to actually come up to the top of the links area and go pound links and add that in separately. It's a border on the right hand side of the links area, and it's going to be a 1 pixel, just a really thin light border just to get a little visual separation. It's CC 9966 color, and it's dotted. It's not even a solid line. I'm just trying to get a very slight styled border between the two columns. Let's see what that looks like. Refresh, and there you can see the little dotted border between. It doesn't affect anything except the two. And notice that it stops here, and that's just because it's on the links and not on this side. If I put a left border here, it would extend all the way down. Okay, well, let's see. Did we achieve our final result? I think so. It looks like we've got everything we wanted. Notice how far down, by the way, the copyright is. And that's partially because of this added space that we created below the paragraph. So that's down below here, in addition to the other spacing that's already mixed into the table. Remember, we got cell padding on the bottom of this cell and the top of this cell. So we've got extra stuff. You know, we could work harder at trying to minimize some of that if we wanted to, but we're not going to bother here. You can see also that there's some margin area at the bottom of the page. That's actually done by the CSS that we began with. There's the body margin area here. 15 pixels on the top, 5% on the right, 10 pixels at the bottom, and another 5% on the left. And the border I was talking about that was on the table is this one. That's that really thin 1 pixel line around the table itself, on the outer edges of the table. Okay, well, that concludes our work today with, I should say today, you may have started one day and finished another by the time. This was a pretty lengthy set of CSS. But at any rate, that concludes our tour of the font and text properties. I think we touched just about all of them, except for a few that just aren't really used very much at all and don't have much compatibility across the browsers. So I hope this was informative. You know, we'll learn more about some of these properties at a later date, but this certainly was good practice, and it's a pretty, I think, a pretty realistic looking page with a lot of the issues that you'll typically find in them. So I hope you found it useful, and that'll be the end of this video. Thank you.